Well, it looks like we're getting a critical mass here. So we're going to get started with this session here shortly with how Microsoft is electrifying their kitchens with Katie Ross from Microsoft and Jevika Kane. I'm your host. I'm Ted Tiffany with Gutman and Blauwit Consulting Engineers, and we've been working for Katie on the Building Decarbonization Practice Guide, something that Microsoft helped sponsor the development of this, which is, oh God, between 80 or 90 volunteers that have put together these different chapters for commercial electrification, multifamily electrification. Embodied carbon is one of our chapters that we're releasing. And we just released the chapter on electrified kitchens in the Building Decarbonization Practice Guide. And this chapter was really a request from Katie about 3 years ago. Really, at the start of this project, was like, we don't have any guidance on our kitchens on how to electrify. And so, this resource that we built with the help of so many volunteers. I have to say thank you to everybody that was donated their technical knowledge, their time to get this done, and all of our sponsors that helped us fund this. They're listed here at the bottom, but Katie, this is my one time to say thank you in person. Really thank you for all your hard work and all of your employees donating their time to this. So really what this guide goes through is technology for the built environment, and that's everything from HVAC, domestic hot water, technical applications like electric fireplaces we've got included. Everything from small buildings to big campus scale applications for HVAC. We've got technology and approaches for electrification. And specifically with this kitchen electrification guide, we go through the technologies, why it's different, and through the applications through Fishnick, who's done a lot of work through the PG&E funding sources to look at electrification technology and the types of equipment to make a smaller, faster, and more flexible electric kitchens. And one thing we've really had a great participation in this particular chapter are our chefs, and educating us on what they need in terms of functioning the role of delivering good food and what technology, electrified technology, that can help deliver that application. So I'm going to get a shout out to Chef Chris Galarza too, who put so much effort into helping us understand electrification technology. And Jevika Kane, he is going to be here today to explain what that meant for Microsoft and how they accomplished that. So Katie, with that, I will let you take this over. I am going to moderate this discussion, and I'm going to encourage you guys to put questions into the Q&A. Feel free to chat amongst yourselves in the chat, but direct questions to Jevik and Katie throughout this webinar, please put them in the Q&A so that I can monitor them, and we can get those answered either as we go or at the end. So other than that, Katie, why don't you take us away?
Great, thank you. Looking forward to this discussion. I think I can speak for both Jevik and I. This has been a labor of love for us and all of our team working on this. We have learned a lot, and we are thrilled to be at the point now where we can really share this with everyone, because our hope is that this really spurs the full sort of industry shifting in this direction, and we feel it's our responsibility and opportunity to really give everything that we've learned to everyone to make this simpler. So just some brief background as I go through. Microsoft has been committed to sustainability for quite some time. We, in 2020, made new announcements for the next decade of our sustainability commitments, and they are to be carbon negative, water positive, and zero waste, all by 2030, as well as protecting more land than we operate on. So my job as the lead of sustainability for Microsoft's real estate portfolio is really to think about how do those really large, ambitious commitments feed into a global real estate portfolio. For context, when I talk about real estate and Microsoft, We have about 38 million square feet globally. Our headquarters is located in Puget Sound, about 16 million square feet, 130 some odd buildings. And we only cover the office portfolio. So we have an entire other incredible team working on our data centers. And so when I talk about real estate, we're talking about all of our workspace. In 2017, we made an announcement that we would be redeveloping a portion of our headquarters in Puget Sound, 3 million square feet of new real estate, office space, amenity space. It's 17 buildings. And in 2017, we sort of sat back and said, what can we do from a sustainability perspective? And one of the most compelling components for us as we were thinking about this strategy is we know that we can develop zero carbon buildings today. We know that we can develop all electric buildings. We know that we can reduce our embodied carbon. So let's make that commitment and have it sort of play out at this big scale of 3 million square feet and really provide a case study for how that could scale into other industries and for other campuses. As Ted mentioned, one of the challenges with this was as we were looking for case studies of others who had done these types of interventions at this scale, there really weren't any. There were, some smaller examples of all electric kitchens or all electric buildings was a little bit easier to do a comparison, but the scale of what we were looking at, there weren't a lot of other comparison points, which just meant that we sort of took that upon ourselves to document that and make sure that we were communicating that going forward. So these are some of our commitments on that campus modernization project. We have a commitment to reduce our embodied carbon by 30% or more and use the EC3 tool to track and maintain that commitment. I'll talk a little bit about our thermal energy center, which was a key component as we were thinking about electrifying all of our heating and cooling. We have 100% carbon-free electricity already sourced to Microsoft. So moving to all electric solutions for daily operations was a must. And I will say, of all of this laundry list, the most challenging thing that we started with was how are we going to electrify our kitchens? So we'll spend the majority of our time today talking about that. Briefly, we on one of the strategies to have all electric daily operations was to develop a thermal energy center. This thermal energy center is all electric, and we have dug 898 geowells, 550 feet into the ground, which will provide heating and cooling for the entirety of the campus, which will reduce our energy consumption by 50% compared to typical utility or gas-based utility plants, as well as by centralizing them with a central utility plan, we're getting an additional 30% reduction. So a really key strategy to meeting our energy reduction goals. But we're here today to talk more about cooking. So as I mentioned, cooking was the sticking point. That was where we really had not done it. We really had not been able to find any other large-scale commercial kitchens that were doing this in 2017. But we knew that we had to commit, we had to be all in, we had to be all electric. We couldn't do a phased approach to say, all right, well, 80% of our equipment today is gas. We'll do a 50-50 split. We'll reduce our gas a little bit. We really saw this as an all or nothing strategy. So for campus modernization, the campus that I've been talking about, we have 5 urban food halls, 2 restaurants, dozens of other dining options. We'll be serving well over 10,000 meals per day, and all of that will be on exclusively electric equipment. So back in 2017, as we started introducing this strategy, our chefs and dining team understandably had some cause for concern and questions. There were questions about experience, authenticity. We very much value the diversity of the types of cuisines that we serve at Microsoft, and also the authenticity with which we cook those. We also, from an experience perspective, have done a lot to invest in experiential cooking, where you can see, the flames in front of you when you're charbroiling a hamburger. You can see the flames of the wok. How does that change when you no longer have fire to rely on for those things? There were questions about comfort and safety and efficiency and design flexibility. Cost was obviously a big one. Were there even going to be pieces of equipment that we needed to source to build the campus? We had a ton of perceptions. Javik and I were sort of thinking what were back in 2017, what were some of the things that we had assumed, right? So gas is always hotter. We're going to need to rewrite our whole menu. We have more control with gas. We're going to need more equipment than we would otherwise if we switched to all electric. It just tastes better with all gas. It'll be too slow. We'll have massive lines. And so really what we looked at with all of this information was we can't compromise on the strategy. We have to go to all electric, and time is on our side in this example. So we started in 2017 to say we will not be delivering this campus for another 5 to 7 years. We have time to test. We have time to work with equipment manufacturers. And so that's really was the assignment that we set off with as a dining team. And I'll pass it over to Javik, who will sort of talk you through how we started the process of getting to yes and making this full transition and the success at the end.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Katie. And yeah, again, my name is Javik. So I was fortunate enough to be part of the testing that kind of went through this. And again, my job here on Redmond campus is as a regional chef is that, we support, right? And we support dining. So when it first came out as, we're going to an all electric facility. And again, I think what Katie showed on the previous slide, all in quotation, was probably my team in terms of our response to, what do you mean we have to cook in all electric? We've been cooking with gas. We love gas. And classically, a lot of chefs are trained on gas. I mean, I went to school learning how to cook on gas, and majority of the kitchens that I've worked in was always gas. So again, I think the first block was just, it was a mental block as a chef, because I was accustomed to a certain piece of equipment. Now, as we went through it, a lot of questions, right, came through, but what it boiled down to was that, okay, well, let's test, right? So I was brought in to do the testing of all the equipment that we were planning to bring on. And again, what you see here on the screen is that we had to capture it, right, in a way where it's data driven, and then that way we can speak to it. So the test parameters that you see in front of you is essentially what we went in, and we tested every piece of equipment, right, from current, meaning from gas to electric. What is the main difference? And if there is a difference, can we tell the difference? So we went through all of that from, the portion per hour, the current batch sizes, the delta, right? What is the difference between gas and electric? If there was any difference in terms of production, can I cook the same amount of burger on a gas versus an induction with the same capacity, right? Like the recovery rate, all that stuff, we definitely took into to consideration. You want to go on the next slide, Katie? So to kind of give you guys an idea of the test process. Now, again, mind you, this took months in the process. When my boss, essentially the culinary director, literally gave us a challenge of, okay, well, I need you to look at the piece of equipment that's that's laid out, that we've identified as an electric, and that you need to go test it. So I did. So I grabbed myself and a couple of chefs, and then essentially we went out and test the equipment. It was literally bringing in product and going, okay, what menu items do we bring in that was more popular? So we based this out of essentially data that we already know on campus, what was popular, right? Pasta dishes were popular. A la minute items like center to plate items were popular. Breakfast was a big thing. So we wanted to test all those out in terms of throughput. Now, what you see in front of you is just one of the steps that we did in noting our findings, right? So from gas to electric, we did a comparison, right? The preheating as an example versus gas versus electric. So I found all those out, we noted it, and I can tell you the first round, I was still not convinced. Again, I had a pre-notion of that, I think gas will always be better. And then same thing. So we did the testing. So I did more of the minute items, things that you can pick up, to the bigger items, as you can kind of see here. We went with, we do a lot of roasting, right? We do a lot of bulk production. So let's test that out as well, because not only will it affect, the cafes, but catering as well. So we looked at a piece of equipment that is, used all around campus, which is, the ovens, right? So what is the capacity there? What's the output there? Is it the same? So we went through it, and pictures. So what you see here is live data from, who knows, I think it was 2017, 2018. But literally as soon as, we started kind of playing around with, okay, well, what can we do, right? Let's test it out. So we began to, cook proteins, take pictures of proteins, and go, okay, well, here we go, right? Like, what's the main difference? And can I tell the difference? Also taste test. We went, okay, if I cook it on a piece of, griddle gas versus electric, is there any difference in taste? Probably not, but all of that, like we definitely highlighted, and we ensured that we were covering it from all aspects, right? So a lot of the stuff that you're seeing here, from the combi ovens to the range to the griddle to the wok, right? So the wok itself was such a primary tool, because it took us some time to kind of go through with it. So key learnings, a lot of key learnings. I can tell you my first round on wok. So I'm going to kind of bring it back to the wok in specific. And the unique thing about this induction wok is that, again, it's commercial, right? First of its kind. You probably see small ones out there, home uses, etc., but nothing to this extent where it's for a commercial use kitchen. Now, typically, if you see a wok, right, there's water always running, and the purpose for that is that to cool the rest of the unit, because it does buckle in terms of it's so hot that it actually it warps the steel around it, right? So that waterfall that you see, that's water cooling it down. That's how hot it gets. So for this particular piece of equipment, that water is non-existent. It's not needed. That's just one variation. The other piece of it was the heat, right? So if you think of a wok, all the BTUs coming out of there, there's definitely residual heat. And then obviously as the cooks, as the chefs, right, it's super hot. But this one, believe it or not, it does not create that at all, obviously. So the heat transfer, if you will, or the heat itself is right directly on the wok pan itself. And you don't feel the heat. So, it helps our team out as well in terms of, man, I want to work at that station. I'm not sweating as much. The hood system is another piece too that was, that we looked at in terms of it only works when there's steam or where there's, smoke, but we don't generate that. So it only kicks in when it's needed. So there's definitely some pretty awesome technology that went into building that particular station. Now, again, I burnt at least like my first 3 weeks, I was burning everything left and right? Like literally I could not control it. I didn't know how. Due to the fact that Katie alluded to is that I could not see the flame. So typically on a wok, I know how hot it gets. I know when to pull it. I know kind of the dynamics and the function of it, but with the electric, I just didn't know where I was looking at, right? Because there's no noise, there's nothing. It's literally heat transfer. So I had to shift as a chef. I think the biggest learnings here for that particular piece of equipment is that I needed to adjust how I cook. Instead of using a few senses, I actually needed to use all the 5 senses in cooking on the wok, because I need to see it from a visual perspective. I need to smell it if something is burning. I need to hear it, see if it sizzles, if it sears, if it's not too hot. So I was able to adjust how I cook from a different perspective, right? Instead of just all visual and kind of hearing, I had to use all of them. So in a sense, it kind of helped me out too. The more I work with it, obviously, the better I think I've become to handle it. Am I an expert at the wok? No, but I'm able to maneuver through it better than I did when I first started. And I can tell you, it's a lot easier now in terms of cooking and controlling, just because I went through it. So a lot of learnings for me there. But yeah, it's been an awesome adventure. And again, we're continuing to look at different equipment that can, that we can use throughout our process here at Microsoft Dining.
And so as Javik walked through, that was our very rigorous testing. Part of that was because, you sort of have two options when you get pushback on a shift. It's always going to, with sustainability, there's a lot of change management, right? And you kind of have two options. You can say, no, I don't think your concerns are valid, or you can say, yeah, let's figure it out. Your concerns are absolutely valid, and let's test and understand what some of those concerns are and whether or not we can make changes to the equipment. We did a lot of work partnering with manufacturers, and we were fortunate enough to have time with those manufacturers. I think a really good story that we had with working with Jade Middleby Marshall on the walk is we had a perception that gas was hotter than electric. So we asked them for a very hot induction, and the first version of that walk we got, it almost melted the pan. It was so hot. So we learned that gas was not hotter than induction, and then we obviously went back and came up with a less hot version, which was still hotter than gas. And so we were fortunate in that we had some time to test, and we had reserved this R&D time to do this, but that's really what we're hoping to provide back to the broader community, to say we've done all this rigorous testing and here's our results. And in the idea of transparency, this is what we open. So we've been talking about campus modernization, which is the 3 million square foot campus. At the same time, we were working on developing One Astera, which is a leased building across the street from this larger campus. And because we were delivering it faster than campus modernization, we made the decision, let's make this one all electric too, and have this be really our testing bed for a lot of the research and development we've already done on the equipment list for Campus Mod, and also our training ground for all of our chefs. So here's where we landed for One Astera. This isn't going to be the exact same equipment list for campus modernization because it's much larger, and also, as we have found over the past 5 years, the industry is rapidly shifting to electric and induction options. And so we're constantly finding new things to test and pilot. I think we have 25 plus equipment lists for campus modernization. So we're constantly iterating and finding better options. We certainly have been using a lot of induction. I think one of the biggest lessons learned for us as we've gone through this is traditionally radiant has been what has been understood to be electric equipment, and induction is newer, particularly at the commercial scale. But we have found massive energy reduction opportunities with switching even minor pieces of equipment, less than 10 pieces of equipment from a radiant to an induction system, and seeing substantial energy reduction opportunities. So it's something we're constantly iterating and testing on. We can't have a presentation where we don't show pictures of all of the incredible food that Javik and his team are creating. So all of these have been created with electric only energy sources. We have multiple multiple stations within One Astera, which is our newest kitchen or food hall that opened in April. And we have introduced a lot of, found that we have the same authenticity commitments, the same diversity commitments, the same speed commitments, and the same ability to show the experiential. We still have a wok, it just doesn't happen to have a flame. We have a masa grinder for our masa station, and are sourcing heirloom corn for that. So there's still sort of that experiential component of it. It's just not, you just can't see a flame. Javik, did you want to add anything about your glamour shop?
Yeah. So the shots here are definitely from one Astera, and everything that you see here is cooked on an electric, right? So at the end of it all, we did some tests as well, and believe it or not, part of the R&D process was to actually get senior leadership to do a tasting, and then we actually cooked the menu items in gas and also electric. And then, the biggest question was that can you tell the difference, right? If I made fried rice on the induction wok, are you able to tell me, if it's gas or electric? And you'll be surprised that it was mixed reviews. It was all over the board. Like nobody really knew.
You could
And
tell the difference.
so yeah, it was a great test to what the team has kind of done with the amount of training that we've done. And and again, every piece of equipment requires a different skill set. But I tell you, one thing that we've been looking at is that how do we bring that in the forefront? So again, with the team that I brought on, one thing that I've learned is that it's all mindset, right? So again, is gas hotter? No, not really. The walk to Katie's point, I mean, that thing can boil water, and then you guys have to see it. It's amazing where it'll boil water in less than 15 seconds, right? I mean, it's so hot. And again, keep in mind too is that this is version 4, as Katie noted. We work with the manufacturer and adjust it not only from a user perspective, as a chef perspective, but also from an actual equipment. So the wok itself was just generating way too much power, so we had it dialed down. It came back again. We tested again. We're like, you know what? It's there, but it still needs to get reduced down. So we kind of went back and forth on it, and then we found a sweet spot, if you will, to where it's manageable, where literally you're not burning anything as soon as you put it down, right? It's actually more of a controlled situation. So there's definitely all those processes that we looked at, but overall, I mean, the reality of it, gas versus electric, like there is no main difference in the visuals, because the way we're looking at it is that it's a cooking equipment that, as long as we train our associates and our team to use it and embrace the nuance of it's actually better. And we have chefs that we've tacked on for the testings that they were like me in the beginning. Like they're like, this is not going to work. There's no way we can do it. But I tell you, some of those guys, including myself, are probably big advocates of, what, yeah, bring it on. I think it's pretty fun. And the best part is, like, I'm not sweating. So that's the best part. It keeps us cool. So it's definitely, it's great.
Well, so we because we recently opened our first all electric, which I will say is now our standard going forward. So every food hall, kitchen, cooking space that we develop globally will be all electric. And we're also now investing in determining what the phase out for existing kitchens are to switch to all electric. And all of this, again, is in line with our carbon negative commitment by 2030. But with our early lessons learned from April till now, Jevic and I put our heads together and said, all right, would we have done anything differently in opening one Astera? I'll talk to the middle one and incorporating employee education and food hall design. This was an interesting one, and I think as sustainability professionals and design professionals in general, I often like to say that we do so much work at the front end, making sure that it's as sustainable as possible. And oftentimes we are so tired by the end of it, we forget to explain to our employees or the occupants what it is we actually did. It's also complex. All of us in the sustainability world have definitely experienced the challenge of trying to boil down these very complex technical topics into something that is, more bite-sized to continue on with our food puns. So one of the big successes for our team was that you couldn't tell the difference. If you ordered fried rice at Cafe 34, which is gas, and you ordered fried rice at Monastera, which is electric, you would not know the difference whatsoever in the dish. And that is a success for us. That was a metric that we were looking for. And the challenge is with that, then the employees don't necessarily know that we have made this switch, and the power and excitement of electrifying our kitchens, electrifying our operations, especially as we know that our employees are incredibly engaged in sustainability and are constantly wanting to know what they can do to further support Microsoft and the planet in our goals to combat climate change. And so I think that was a little bit of an opportunity for me, is, you know, how do we incorporate more educational signage into the space, which we're now doing, or, you know, something that's visually that's explaining, like, yes, there is no flame, because most employees, you know, and myself included, don't necessarily think about what I'm seeing in how it's getting cooked, but just that I, you know, have food and can go about my lunch. So that was a big lesson learned for us in the delivery of the food hall of Monastera. And Javik, do you want to talk to the other two?
Yeah, so definitely more time. We went through the testing, and you know, we went through it pretty fast and furious, and we tried to beat it up as much as we could. But definitely for me, more time, because the more I work with it, the more efficient I get. Just like anything else, right? It's practice makes perfect. So I think the skill set too is what we've realized, or what I've actually realized, is that you take someone that is, you know, accustomed to a gas walk or a gas range, or just those particular equipment. It was actually harder for me to train them on the induction, because the challenge that I found was that the motions and the movements and just the timing of it, they have it in it's programmed. Like, you understand that at a certain time you got to move the pan, or you got to do this and that. So they were recreating that. Like the wok itself, we put a bunch of wok cooks through it once we were prepared, and I tell you, they were burning everything. They weren't happy with it. They were just like, no, I can't. They can't do it. They can't do that. And I'm like, cool, fair, because I was on the same boat. But we took someone. We finally gave up and said, you know what? Let's try a different route. So we took someone who has zero experience from the gas wok, zero. We went in and we taught them how to work the new wok, and, you know, when to pull and the power. And I tell you, like, the results were a lot better than the ones that were, you know, cooking in gas woks for the longest time. So to me, that was such an interesting piece of that, meaning, you know, I was able to teach somebody because they were just a sponge and they wanted to learn how to work with the new piece of equipment without understanding or without reverting back to what they typically know. So I thought that was a pretty great find. So that's what we've been doing with our associates. And actually it helps, you know, the culinary side of things, because before, a wok cook was a specific skill set that you must have and you must need with a certain experience. For this particular case, I can tell you, Monastera, the cooks that are working the Pacific Rim's concept, they are not wok cooks by any means. They have not have any experience, but I tell you, they can make the fried rice the same as I would have my guy at, you know, another cafe that is, you know, gas proficient or is wok proficient. So I thought that was cool. The other piece of it too was that partnership with the manufacturers, right? I think that was the best thing that we did, was that, you know, we went back and forth and said, you know what, can we do it this way? Can we elevate it this way? Power adjustments, buttons, right? I mean, this is like, you know, turning on an engine, right? It's different buttons. I mean, I'm used to knobs. Now it's like interface, a button, you know, up, down, whatever. So it's a different model now. So I think working with the manufacturing, that was one thing that I really appreciate, because they were able to work with the chefs, myself included, and just kind of go through, you know, the day to day. And this is how we operate. This is how we function. So it's the reality of the user itself. So I think, you know, that side of things was a win for us ultimately.
Okay. Ted, do you want to? I think that is the end of our presentation. I see there's a number of questions. Ted, do you want to take us through the questions?
Yeah, I mean that kind of just leads right into one of the great questions that Gilbert. It's like Microsoft's getting into the appliance business now. Can you speak to a little bit more about what kind of influences you guys had on the electrified equipment that you're ordering?
Sure, of course. So I wouldn't necessarily classify it as us getting into the appliance business, but just like anything else, is we, are trying to move the needle and know this is where we need to go from a climate perspective. We would talk to manufacturers in the same way that we're talking to our, building materials suppliers and saying, hey, look, we need EPDs because we can't understand the carbon emissions of these materials if we don't have EPDs, and we're making decisions based on carbon, so we need EPDs. So it's the same level of conversation. And I think in this component, we're really thinking about how can we take the experience, these commitments that we have, being one of the first movers in these spaces, and provide the very necessary feedback to the manufacturers. Say, hey, here's what we're finding. Here's what our chefs are asking for. Could this be incorporated? And we knew that that was going to be, ultimately a responsibility for Microsoft as we were making this shift, is that we would have to partner really closely with the manufacturers. And we've been very pleasantly surprised with not only the partnership that we've had with the manufacturers we've worked with, but also, the speed with which we've seen the industry as a whole in the commercial equipment sector shift from 2017, where if you'd asked us to deliver in 2017, it would have looked entirely different because there were not a commercial equipment for some of the what we ended up ultimately putting in Monastera. So we sort of had this saying at the beginning of betting on yes. We're betting on yes that we will have the equipment needed in 2022 or 2023. We, I guess, are good at betting, and it worked out for us. But that was certainly a component that we knew was going to be a requirement for us.
That's an awesome impact on the industry too, and it kind of leads into the other questions, and I'm going to combine two. It was more about the testing phase, the time it took to do that, and somebody asked a question if you guys did any testing on indoor air quality comparisons between the gas-fired kitchen and the electric kitchen. Did you guys take into account indoor air quality?
Certainly. So that was, I'll kind of answer that in a couple of different ways. So indoor air quality was obviously a benefit for us as we were making the decision to switch to all electric. We knew that that would be a consideration. We also knew it would be considerably more energy efficient. And from a cost perspective, the campus did not have a gas line. We did not have to run a gas line. So there is a savings in that component. So from an air quality perspective, that was a consideration. I can't speak to right now whether or not, I haven't been in the weeds on some of those, whether we've done the testing or not, but I can say from all the studies that we've reviewed, yes, the air quality would be significantly better with not having any combustion in the building at all. And then from a timing perspective, this is one of the silver linings. I hate to use that word, but there were, because of some of the lower demands on food production in the past few years, we had the ability to do a little bit more testing. So that was certainly a component that we benefited from. And it gave us that flexibility to really do the rigorous testing that you saw on the screen from Javik of, yes, we can test these meals many, many times and learn how to cook them in the way that they will need to be cooked to ensure that parity.
Yeah, Javik, just to follow up on that, our codes and standards, the way we design and engineer buildings, are kind of fixed on gas. You mentioned in your talk about the reduction in airflow, and those sensors really designed for triggering heat and smoke for those fume hoods. Do you see any feedback from your construction into the codes and standards and regulatory kind of design issues around makeup air and exhaust air for your kitchens now?
No, I don't think so. I mean, again, I'm not an expert at the airflow and whatnot, but I can tell you from experience in terms of working in that particular kitchen at Astera. So when we opened, you could definitely tell the difference, right? And this is more for the back of the house operation as well as the front as well, because typically, our kitchens is designed, it's also customer facing, right? So imagine a big hood system, just full bore, right? And then you're in front of the customer, there wouldn't be any interaction. So for us, it's very quiet actually. And you'll be surprised that it does only kick in when there is fumes or some type of steam that the sensor picks up, and that's when it kicks in. But when it kicks in, it only does it for a few minutes just to get it out of the air, if you will. And then when it's done, it completely shuts off. So it's a definite change from a kitchen perspective, because I mean, again, working in the kitchen, it's always loud, right? People know it as loud. It's hot. It's just not a great environment. But I can tell you, working at Astera, and then also talking to the team at Astera, especially on those hot side, that's not the case anymore. So, in the future, I honestly think it will change, right? Burn marks from chefs and cooks are no longer there. So from a safety perspective, it's definitely on the right track, right? And again, putting my team first is that, yeah, a lot of times that's a concern, is that, it's too hot, I'm gonna get burned. No, there's no burns. So definitely it's a great improvement, and it's the right thing to do.
And Ted, I'll just say, certainly that was a consideration from a code perspective. There really were not any examples of all electric kitchens. So there were a lot of conversations about, we kept revisiting, like, well, if there's gas, and like, there's no gas line, so can't ever be gas. And I saw there was a question about leased buildings. One Astera is actually a leased building. And so that was, we were fortunate that we were able to have a conversation at the beginning of the lease to say, or beginning of the design with the landlord to say it needs to be an all-electric building. And we were also fortunate that there was a power capacity that would allow us to do that. So I fully recognize that that is not the situation for every single leased building. However, One Astera is a leased building. So certainly can be done in a leased building.
Yeah, you kind of answered Noah's question about how that would change between an owned and a leased building. So that's
fantastic. It would be. I mean, the considerations that we're thinking about now as we think about phasing it in is power capacity. We found that it's a 1-for-1 floor plate. So we had an initial concern that we would need a lot more equipment, and therefore we would have to figure out how to design the kitchens entirely to fit more electric equipment than what was in there for gas. We found that wasn't the case. It really is a 1-for-1 footprint switch. Okay. So it's really just the power capacity of the building.
All right. Well, I got 3 minutes left, and I have a very important question. Alicia asked, does it make sense to electrify kitchens in all of your global locations, considering brown and browner grids? I mean, that's definitely
it's a great question.
Yeah.
So the way that I think about it is twofold, and I want to recognize that this is unique to Microsoft. So this decision will need to be made specific to each and every company based on their strategy. But Microsoft has a commitment to be 100% 100% renewable by 2025. So that component does feed into the strategy that we're thinking of. From my perspective, one of the unique components of working in an infrastructure-based role rather than a product cycle that is significantly shorter is you're looking at the end of useful life, right? So if we have an asset that we're making a decision that is going to be there in 20, 30, 50 years, we are making a decision of whether or not to add a gas line or cap a gas line that is going to be there for 50 years, which is different than making a decision that only has a 1-year life cycle. And so my perspective is, and the strategy that we are using within the Microsoft real estate portfolio from an electrification perspective is to electrify, knowing that we are committed to 100% renewable electricity, and that will help further the greening of the grid globally. We do recognize that there are some challenges to that, depending on the different companies' commitments. But because we're making infrastructure investments that will be in place for 20+ years, it's important for us to think about that from a long-term perspective.
Yeah, that first point perspective and today's grid versus future grid scenarios and what you're doing on the renewable portfolio section is really important forecasting to do. It's not just
Yeah.
about the grid. So
I
fantastic.
think the other thing, I think we're also, as a society, recognize we need to be doing both at the same time. That's why my initial headline was electrify and decarbonize. We need to do both right now. And so, you know, there are going to be considerations and trade-offs within that. But that's sort of our perspective from a real estate portfolio. The answer is both.
And I think that's a great place to leave this session, right on time. Thank you guys so much. Jevik, Katie, excellent job. Thank you so much for everything you're doing, driving the industry towards decarbonization and electrification. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. We are publishing a white paper of all of our findings and equipment lists and all sorts of fancy things, most likely in the fall. So be on the lookout for that if you want more details than you probably ever would need from us as we try and help the industry.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much. Really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Bye now.